So there was a big demonstration, and the police attacked it, and there were several injuries. So what happened was, again, the general cycle that I just described. In these situations where people perceive a common interest, in this case to fight against these ordinances, repression simply makes the movement grow. And the government of de Gaulle was very willing to provide repression. I mean, they brought out their National Guard, which is called the CRS, and I remember at the time the favorite chant was CRS SS, which, with the war only 20 years in the past, this was a big insult to compare the French National Guard to the SS. So there were growing demonstrations, 20,000. Eventually the students started fighting the police. They started picking up the stones, taking the streets apart and throwing them at the police. And the unions, which were led at that time by the French Communist Party, the leadership of the union was trying to back off. They didn't want to risk their organizations in a confrontation with the government. But rank-and-file workers started to join in the demonstrations. So again, the unions, as in San Francisco 30 years later, in order to keep control of the situation in some way, said, all right, we'll call a demonstration. So they called a demonstration.
Who did?
The CGT, the main union confederation, on May 13th, called a demonstration. And it was a tremendous turnout. There was between 1 and 2 million people on the streets of Paris. So under the protection of this vast turnout, which was far too large to be repressed, the police cleared out, the students of Sorbonne occupied the Sorbonne. Now, I was at the time a student at Columbia, and we had had a miniature mass strike in Columbia the previous month. And in fact, we had occupied Columbia University from April 23rd to May 1st. So this was a couple of weeks later. And when we read about it, we all said, oh, the French are imitating us.
Really? Wow.
But in fact,
you never know.
It was an idea. One of the things that's characteristic of many of these mass strikes, including the mass strikes in Egypt, is occupations. It's taking a building, an institution, or in the case of Egypt, where the weather's always nice, a public square, and massively occupying it. And one of the reasons why this is so powerful is these occupations become schools. They become mass production. They have become factories for the mass production of consciousness. Because suddenly, and I experienced this when I was at Columbia, suddenly you see on a 24-hour basis, these are very intense experiences. People are in these occupations 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Continuous discussions. All of a sudden, instead of individuals, each fighting their own battles with the system, you're part of an entire class that's both fighting this battle and very intensely figuring out how to fight it. So at the same time, you're part of this class, and yet people are figuring out what's their individual contributions to make to this movement. And you see people being very creative with, flyers, with organizing initiatives.